Dash worked in a prestigious company called Hadley Corp. He spent more time fetching coffee than actually contributing to projects, and he hoped that one day his hard work would pay off. What he didn't expect was to be called to the CEO's office one afternoon. Dash adjusted his suit nervously as he stepped into the CEO, Mr. Hadley's office. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Dash asked nervously. "Dash," Mr. Hadley greeted, gesturing for him to sit. "You've been with us for how long now?" "Almost a year, sir. And in that time, you've proven yourself to be diligent and, from what I hear, rather charming." Dash was not sure where this was going. "Thank you, sir." The CEO leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "I have a proposition for you." Dash sat up in his chair. "What kind of proposition?" "I want you to date my son, Vic." Dash blinked once, then twice. He was sure he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me," Mr. Hadley said with a firm expression. "My son is difficult. He is cold and unapproachable. I think he needs human connection," Mr. Hadley continued, as if he was describing a stubborn client rather than his own son. "He's completely closed off, won't even entertain the idea of dating anyone. But I believe you have the right qualities to break through to him." Dash stared at the CEO, trying to wrap his head around how absurd he sounded. "You want me to date your son?" he repeated, just to be sure he wasn't hallucinating. Mr. Hadley chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Vic needs someone to bring him out of his shell, and you are perfect for the job." Dash's instincts screamed at him to say no and run far away, but curiosity got the better of him. "And what exactly is in it for me?" The CEO's lips curved into a knowing smile. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the desk. "This," he said. Dash opened the folder and felt his jaw drop. Inside was a contract offering a sum of money so large it could wipe out his student loans, cover his rent for years, and still leave him enough to splurge on things. "This is a lot of money," Dash said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is," Mr. Hadley agreed, "and it's all yours if you succeed. All I ask is that you date him for 3 months. Make him happier, get him to open up, that's it." "And Vic doesn't know about this?" Dash asked, suspicion creeping into his tone. "Absolutely not," Mr. Hadley replied firmly. "He must never know." Dash leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling on him. On one hand, it felt wrong. Manipulative, even, but on the other hand, the money was huge. It was a once-in-a-lifetime offer, so maybe this wasn't such a terrible idea. After a long pause, Dash sighed. "Fine, I'll do it." Mr. Hadley's smile widened. "Excellent." The following morning, Dash received an email from Mr. Hadley's office with a single sentence, "Report to my office first thing today." Dash sighed, already regretting his decision. As much as the money was going to change his life, it didn't erase how guilty he felt. "Come in," Mr. Hadley called as Dash knocked hesitantly on the office door. Dash stepped inside to find the CEO already typing away on his laptop with a confident smile. "Good morning, Dash. I've arranged for you to be transferred. Effective immediately, you are no longer just an intern." Dash blinked. "Wait, what? Transferred where?" "Congratulations," Mr. Hadley said with a smirk. "You're now Vic's personal assistant." Dash froze. "Personal assistant, sir, I don't have any experience in." Mr. Hadley raised a hand, cutting him off. "You'll be fine. Your job is simple. Spend time with him, help him with his schedule, and gently encourage him to come out of his shell. The closer you are, the easier this will be." Dash's stomach was in twists. "And what did you tell Vic about this sudden transfer?" Mr. Hadley leaned back in his chair with an amused smile on his face. "I told him you're an exceptional intern with remarkable organizational skills, and I personally selected you to assist him. It's believable enough." Dash swallowed hard, and Vic didn't object. "Oh, he objected," Mr. Hadley said with a laugh. "But I told him it was non-negotiable. He'll come around." Dash didn't share his boss's confidence, but there was no turning back now. That afternoon, Dash stood outside Vic's office, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time before knocking. "Come in," Vic's cold voice called. Dash stepped inside to find Vic seated at his desk, busy with his laptop without glancing up. Dash, right? Vic asked. Yeah, Dash replied, awkwardly stepping forward. I'm your new assistant. Vic finally looked up, his sharp gray eyes narrowing. You're the intern my dad insisted on transferring. That's me, Dash said. Apparently, I'm exceptional. Vic raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. I don't need an assistant. Well, I'm here anyway, Dash said with a forced smile, determined to stay professional. Vic studied him for a moment before shrugging. Fine, just stay out of my way. Dash bit back a sigh. This was going to be fun, he thought. Later that day, Dash followed Vic to a meeting, taking notes on his tablet while Vic presented a strategy to a group of investors. He couldn't help but admire how effortlessly Vic commanded the room, his voice calm and authoritative. But as soon as the meeting ended, Vic's walls went right back up as he strode past Dash without a word. Dash hurried to catch up. Hey, great presentation. Vic glanced at him briefly. Thanks. Dash waited for more, but Vic offered nothing. You, really know how to work a room. Vic stopped walking, turning to face Dash with a raised brow. Is flattery part of your job description? Dash blinked. No, I just thought. Don't waste your time, Vic said, cutting him off. I'm not interested in making small talk. Dash gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, he plastered on a smile, noted. As Vic walked away, Dash muttered under his breath, this guy's going to be the death of me. Back at his desk, Dash pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Mr. Hadley. First day on the job and your son's already impossible. Any advice? Seconds later, his phone buzzed with a reply. Patience, Dash. He's a tough nut to crack, but you're tougher. He kept telling himself that the money's worth it. Dash groaned, leaning back in his chair. Tough nut my ass, he muttered. This guy's a brick wall. The following week, Mr. Hadley dropped another bombshell. You'll be joining Vic on a business trip, he said casually during their latest phone call. Dash nearly dropped his coffee. A business trip with Vic? Are you trying to kill me? Mr. Hadley chuckled. It's a simple conference, Dash. He needs someone to keep him on schedule. Consider it an opportunity to bond. 2 days later, Dash found himself on a plane seated next to Vic, who spent the entire flight immersed in his tablet. He reminded Dash of an iPad kid. They finally landed and got to the hotel. Hi, checking in for Hadley, Dash said, approaching the front desk with Vic behind him. The receptionist smiled politely as she typed into her computer. Then her face changed into an apologetic look. Mr. Hadley, there seems to have been a mix-up. Due to a scheduling error, we only have one room left. Dash froze. I'm sorry, did you say one room? Yes, she confirmed, offering a nervous smile. We're fully booked because of the conference, but the suite has 2 beds. Dash glanced at Vic, whose expression was unreadable. I'm fine with it, Vic said flatly, already pulling out his credit card. Let's just get this over with. Dash gawked at him. Wait, you're okay with this? Sharing a room? Vic gave him a pointed look. Do I have a choice? Well, no, but... Then drop it. He handed his card to the receptionist, who quickly processed the check-in and handed them the key. They entered the suite, and as promised, there were 2 beds in the suite. Vic set his suitcase by the closet, barely sparing Dash a glance. I'll take the bed closer to the window. Sure, Dash said as he flopped onto his bed and stared at the ceiling. This is going to be awkward, isn't it? It doesn't have to be, Vic replied, already unpacking. Just stay on your side and we won't have any problems. Wow. You really know how to make someone feel welcome. Vic shot him a look. You don't have to talk, you know. And you don't have to be so grumpy all the time, Dash retorted, sitting up. You'd think sharing a room with me was some kind of punishment, isn't it? Vic deadpanned. Dash gasped, clutching his chest dramatically. Ouch, you wound me. Vic rolled his eyes but didn't respond. Instead, he sat at the small desk and opened his laptop. I have work to do. Don't disturb me. For the next hour, Dash kept glancing at Vic, half expecting Vic to kick him out for breathing too loudly. But there was something oddly fascinating about watching him work. The occasional furrow of his brows or the way he absent-mindedly tapped his pen against his lips while thinking. Get a grip, Dash, he told himself. This is not the time to develop a crush on your boss's son. That night, as they got ready for bed, Vic came out from the bathroom in sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, his hair slightly damp. Dash, in his own sleepwear, couldn't help but notice how ridiculously good Vic looked. Focus, Dash, don't make this weird, he thought to himself. They climbed into their respective beds, and Dash stared at the ceiling, suddenly hyper-aware of Vic's presence just a few feet away. So, do you snore? He asked, breaking the silence. Vic sighed heavily. Go to sleep, Dash. Right. Good night, Mr. Sunshine. Good night, Vic said, his tone clipped. Dash smirked, closing his eyes. You'll warm up to me eventually, he said, and shifted in his bed, trying to get comfortable. Just as he was on the verge of falling asleep, a loud thud jolted him awake. His eyes flew open, and then he heard a groan. Vic? Dash whispered. I'm fine, Vic responded, causing Dash to sit up, squinting his eyes to see Vic sitting on the edge of his bed, his back to Dash. What's wrong? Dash asked, climbing out of his bed and moving closer. Nothing. Go back to sleep. Dash ignored him and moved around to face Vic. Whoa. Are you okay? Vic was clutching his ankle, his jaw tight. I'm fine, Vic repeated through gritted teeth. Dash crouched down, ignoring the death glare Vic shot him. What happened? I got up to use the bathroom and tripped on the suitcase, Vic muttered. Dash bit back a laugh and reached for Vic's ankle, but Vic immediately pulled back. What are you doing? Trying to help, Dash said, rolling his eyes. Let me see it. You might have twisted it. I said I'm fine. And I said let me see it. Dash grabbed Vic's foot gently but firmly, ignoring his protests. He pressed his fingers against the ankle, carefully checking for swelling, and Vic hissed in pain. Yup, definitely sprained, Dash said. Vic leaned back, closing his eyes. Great. That's just what I need. Dash stood up. Stay put, I'll get some ice. Vic didn't argue, which told Dash just how much pain he was in. A few minutes later, Dash returned with a bag of ice wrapped in a towel. He found Vic still sitting on the edge of the bed, looking grumpy as ever. Here, Dash said, handing him the makeshift ice pack. Vic took it without a word, placing it on his ankle. You know, Dash started as he sat back on his bed, for someone who acts so tough, you're really bad at accepting help. Vic glared at him, and for someone who talks so much, you're really bad at shutting up. Dash smirked. You're welcome, by the way. Vic didn't respond, but after a moment, his expression softened a bit. Thanks, he mumbled. Dash raised an eyebrow. What was that? I don't think I heard you. Don't push your luck. Dash chuckled, lying back down. Night, Vic. The next morning, Dash was already up and dressed when Vic gradually sat up in bed. He winced as he tried to move his ankle, which was now slightly swollen. Dash, noticing the struggle, walked over with a cup of coffee. Good morning, Sunshine. How's the ankle? Vic glared at him, his hair adorably messy from sleep. It's fine, he grumbled. Sure it is, Dash said, placing the coffee on the knit stand. And I suppose you'll just limp your way through the day. Shut up, Vic snapped, attempting to stand. The moment his injured foot touched the ground, he hissed in pain and sat back down. Dash crossed his arms, smirking. Yep, you're doing great. Don't start. Don't worry, I won't, Dash replied, crouching in front of him, because I'm going to help you. Vic frowned. What are you talking about? I'm going to help you get ready, Dash said matter-of-factly. Since you clearly can't manage on your own. Vic leaned back with an annoyed expression. I don't need your help. Yes, you do, Dash interrupted. Now sit there and behave. Before Vic could protest further, Dash crouched down again, grabbing Vic's leg to inspect his ankle. Relax, Dash said, noticing the way Vic stiffened. I'm just making sure this doesn't get worse. Vic sighed but didn't say anything. A little while later, Dash helped Vic limp toward the bathroom. Vic managed to shower by himself, and when he finally came out of the bathroom, Dash had to stop himself from gawking. Vic was dressed in nothing but a pair of black sweatpants, his chiseled ABS on full display. Dash immediately turned away, pretending to check his phone. "Glad to see you didn't drown in there," he said, his voice a little higher than usual. "Funny," Vic said dryly, limping toward the bed. "Here, let me help you," Dash offered, stepping forward. "I'm fine," Vic began, but before he could finish, Dash had placed a steadying hand on his shoulders to guide him. It happened so quickly. Dash's hand slipped lower than intended, brushing against Vic's bare ABS. Dash immediately yanked his hand back, his face burning. I didn't mean. You just touched me," Vic said, his voice dangerously low. "Not on purpose," Dash defended, shaking his head. "I was just trying to help you. Your ABS got in the way." "My ABS got in the way," Vic repeated, crossing his arms. Dash groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, that came out wrong. Forget I said anything." Vic stared at him for a moment before shaking his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You're an idiot." Dash rolled his eyes, but grateful for the change in tone. Vic chuckled softly, barely audible but enough to make Dash's heart skip a beat. "Thanks," Vic muttered, sitting down. Dash blinked. "For what?" "For helping," Vic said, avoiding eye contact. Dash smiled. "Any time." That morning, Dash looped his arm around Vic's waist to help him walk to the restaurant for breakfast, despite Vic saying he could walk himself. "You're very touchy this morning," Vic muttered as they approached the elevator. "Just trying to help, unless you'd prefer I let you face plant in the middle of the lobby," Dash said, smirking. Vic rolled his eyes but didn't push him away. Once they were seated in the restaurant, Dash went to fetch breakfast. "Here," Dash said when he returned, setting a plate in front of him. "I got you pancakes. They might sweeten up that personality of yours." Vic rolled his eyes, smirking slightly. As they ate, Dash couldn't help but notice the discomfort on Vic's face whenever he shifted in his chair. "You okay?" Dash asked, raising an eyebrow. Vic gave a nonchalant shrug. "Just sore. Limping everywhere isn't exactly ideal." Dash chuckled. "Well, maybe if you weren't so stubborn." Vic cut him off, his tone perfectly deadpan. "You'd limp too if you had a rough night like mine." Dash froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What?" Vic blinked, and for a moment, there was only silence between them. Then his eyes widened as he realized what he'd said. "I didn't mean," Vic started, his face red. Dash burst out laughing, practically choking on his food. "Oh my God, did you just—" "Shut up," Vic snapped, looking everywhere but at Dash. "I can't believe you just made a dirty joke," Dash cackled. "It wasn't a joke," Vic muttered, still avoiding eye contact. "I just phrased it wrong." Dash leaned forward, a mischievous grin on his face. "Sure you did. Do you ever stop talking?" Vic growled, but his ears were undeniably red. Dash took a sip of his coffee, still grinning. "No." As Dash and Vic were in the middle of exchanging another round of teasing, a voice cut through their banter. "Mr. Hadley." Both men turned to see a professionally dressed man approaching their table. Vic's expression shifted immediately. "Ah, Miller," he said, his tone now cold. "What's the matter?" Miller glanced at Dash for a moment, then back at Vic. "I didn't realize you had a meeting this early. We have a few things to discuss before the presentation today. Your father requested that you be on time, as always." Dash shot a quick look at Vic, who was already standing, the polite but professional mask returning to his face. "We'll head out right after breakfast," Vic replied. He turned back to Dash. "You're coming with me." As the meeting proceeded, Dash found himself fascinated by Vic. His words were precise and his tone was calm but firm. The man had an aura of control, and Dash couldn't help but admire it. The meeting wrapped up and Vic stood up, glancing over at Dash. "You've been surprisingly helpful today." Dash shrugged, his grin still in place. "So, do I get a reward?" "You're not getting a reward for doing your job," Vic replied, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. As they made their way back to the suite, Dash decided to make small conversation. "So, what's your deal with Miller? You didn't seem too happy to see him." Vic's expression darkened for a brief moment. Miller's fine, just too much of a yes man for my liking. My father likes to keep him around because he's loyal. But loyalty doesn't always mean competence. Dash tilted his head, leaning in slightly. Sounds like you don't have much patience for people who don't think for themselves. Vic's lips twitched as if he was fighting back a smile. Something like that. Then he met Dash's eyes, but you seem different. Dash raised an eyebrow. Different how? Vic looked away. You don't try to impress me or suck up like everyone else. You're not as predictable. Dash could feel his heart racing in his chest. Was that an actual compliment? Vic just looked at him with trust in his eyes, and Dash couldn't help but feel guilty. That evening, Vic was moving much more easily. Looks like you're good as new, Dash said casually. That limp's gone already. Yeah, I don't need your help anymore, Vic replied. Good to know, Dash replied, walking towards Vic. But are you sure you're fine? He asked. I mean, you took that tumble pretty hard this morning. I just want to make sure. Before Dash could finish his sentence, Vic turned toward him with annoyance in his eyes. I said I'm fine. Don't treat me like I'm fragile. The words were sharp, but Dash knew that he was clearly trying to maintain that tough exterior. The opportunity to tease him was just too tempting. All right, but if you end up hurting yourself again, don't come crying to me, Dash said with a grin, playfully nudging him in the side. When nudging him, he lost his balance and stumbled slightly. His hands landed on Vic's chest in an attempt to steady himself, but Vic found himself also losing his balance. The next thing he knew, he was on top of Vic, their bodies pressed together on the bed. For a split second, everything went still. Vic's eyes widened, clearly caught off guard. Dash, still trying to process the situation, froze as well, his hands still awkwardly placed on Vic's chest. Sorry, Dash mumbled, quickly trying to get up, but Vic was faster. In one swift movement, Vic flipped their positions, now pinning Dash beneath him. On the top here, Vic muttered, his voice low with a serious expression on his face. Dash, feeling flustered, chuckled nervously. Right, sure, I didn't mean to. He was cut off by the phone ringing loudly, breaking the tension in the room. Vic looked at the phone with a frustrated sigh, obviously irritated by the timing. He glanced down at Dash for a brief moment before getting off of him. I should answer that, he muttered, stepping back and grabbing his phone from the side table. Dash sat up, quickly clearing his throat and adjusting his shirt. Vic answered the phone. Once the call ended, he turned back to Dash. That was my father, Vic said, more business stuff. Dash nodded, not sure of what to say. There was a moment of silence, both of them still processing what has just happened, Dash realizing that they had crossed a line tonight, even if it wasn't intentional. So, what now? Do we pretend like nothing happened? Dash asked, half joking, half serious. Vic turned, his expression softening just slightly. We don't have to pretend anything, but we're not talking about what just happened. Dash nodded, feeling kind of disappointed. The next day, they traveled back home. The flight was quieter than usual, and Vic had gone back to his quiet, guarded self. They arrived back at the office, and Dash did his best to fall back into his role as Vic's assistant and keeping his distance. But the tension from the trip remained between them. Every time their eyes met, Dash felt his heart beat wildly. Over the next couple of days, things seemed to return to normal. Vic was still distant and Dash was still pretending he didn't feel a pull towards Vic, but one thing had changed. Vic was talking to people more, even smiling occasionally. Dash noticed, and even Mr. Hadley, Vic's father, noticed it too. One morning, Dash was sitting at his desk going through some paperwork when Mr. Hadley stepped into the room. Mr. Hadley sat opposite Dash and lowered his voice. How did the trip go? I noticed something different about Vic lately. He's been more approachable, talking to people and even smiling. That's a bit out of character for him. Dash blinked. It went fine. The meetings were productive, sir, Dash said, trying to sound casual. But yeah, Vic's been more social, I guess. Mr. Hadley raised an eyebrow, leaning in a little closer. What happened on that trip, Dash? He asked, his voice lowering further. Anything I should know. Dash froze for a moment. He wasn't exactly sure what to say. It wasn't like he could just admit that the trip had involved some complicated moments. He quickly tried to recover. It wasn't anything major, Dash said, shrugging nonchalantly. Mr. Hadley watched him closely, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I see. He paused, clearly analyzing Dash's reaction. Well, I'm glad to hear things went smoothly. Dash nodded, watching Mr. Hadley leave. The next few days at the office was so busy, Dash and Vic found themselves working side by side late into the evenings, barely taking breaks. It was another late night, and Dash was frustrated by the never-ending pile of paperwork. Vic, Dash said, I think we need to call it a night soon. We've been here for hours. Vic didn't even glance up. I'm not done yet, he replied, his voice low and sounding tired. Dash sighed, walking over to Vic's desk and taking a seat. At that, Vic finally looked up at Dash, who was sitting on his desk. He opened his mouth as if he was going to say something, his gaze lingering on Dash for a moment too long before he went back to typing slowly, obviously distracted. Vic, Dash said, slowly closing Vic's laptop. We need to talk. About what? Vic asked, his voice soft, eyes looking dazed as he watched Dash get comfortable on his desk. Dash leaned closer, his heartbeat quickening. This thing between us, it's been building up for days now, Dash said in a whisper. Unable to resist anymore, Vic closed the distance between them. Without thinking, he cupped Dash's face in his hands, his lips crashing against his desperately. For a moment, everything seemed to blur and Dash's hands slid to Vic's shoulders, pulling him closer, now sitting on his lap. But as quickly as the kiss had started, Dash pulled back, his hands trembling slightly as he pushed Vic away. No, Dash muttered. He jumped off Vic's lap and shook his head. This is fake. It's all fake, Vic. Vic looked at Dash with confusion and hurt, the look in his eyes making Dash's chest tighten. I can't do this, Dash said. I don't want to fake this anymore, he wanted to explain, to tell Vic everything, but instead he just turned away. I'm sorry, Dash said quietly. I need to go home. Without waiting for a response, Dash grabbed his jacket and left, causing Vic to call after him. That night Dash couldn't sleep as he felt guilty. He couldn't go on with the deal anymore. The next morning, he made his way to his boss's office. Without knocking, he pushed open the door. Mr. Hadley, who was at his desk, looked up with a surprised expression. Dash, what is it? Is something wrong? I'm stopping the deal. I don't want the money, and I don't want to continue this with Vic, Dash said. Why? Mr. Hadley asked, confusion written all over his face. I've fallen for him. I can't manipulate his feelings like that anymore. It's wrong. I don't care about the money. I'm out, Dash said without hesitation. Mr. Hadley's gaze softened. He was also shocked at the revelation. You're making a huge mistake, Dash. You think you're doing the right thing, but you're not. If you walk away now, you might regret it. Dash stood his ground. Maybe, but I'm doing what feels right, and I'm not going to let money be the reason I continue this. Mr. Hadley sighed. All right. If that's what you want, I'll respect it. Dash nodded, turning around to leave, only to find Vic standing in the doorway of the office. He looked hurt and betrayed. Vic's voice was low. His gaze locked on Dash. You've been playing me, haven't you? Dash's throat went dry. He had wanted to tell Vic himself, not wanting him to find out like this. He had hoped for a chance to explain. Vic, Dash started, taking a step toward him. No. Vic snapped, holding his hand up to stop him. Don't even try to justify it, he said, a flash of anger and hurt crossing his face before it hardened again. I trusted you, Dash. I thought this was real. Dash felt his chest tighten as he watched Vic's expression. He looked so vulnerable and hurt. I'm sorry, Vic. I never meant for this to happen, Dash said, tears falling from his eyes. But I've fallen for you. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And I can't keep going with this fake thing anymore. Vic's eyes flickered with something, but it only lasted a moment before his face hardened again. He turned, storming out of the office and slamming the door behind him. Dash's heart sank. He had messed up. He had ruined everything, and now it was too late to fix it. The following week, Vic arrived at his office, expecting to see Dash hovering around with his usual smirk or a casual comment, but there was no sign of him. Vic tried to shrug it off. He shouldn't care for someone that hurt him like that, but he couldn't help but feel uneasy. As the week dragged on, Vic found himself thinking about him more and more. He wanted to know why Dash hasn't been at his office. Did he change departments? On Thursday afternoon, Mr. Hadley called him to his office. "I need to speak with you. It's about Dash." Vic walked into the office, trying to hide his nervousness. "What about him?" he asked, trying to act nonchalant. "He resigned. Dash handed in his resignation letter this morning." Vic froze. "What?" He managed to say, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was hearing, but why? Mr. Hadley sighed, a regretful look on his face. "I think you need to hear the whole story. You know, I wasn't entirely truthful with you. Vic, the situation with Dash was all part of my plan," he said. "I knew Dash needed the money, and I wanted you to open up a bit. I thought if I pushed the right buttons, we could make something happen. What I didn't expect, though, was for Dash to start falling for you." Vic's eyes widened in disbelief. "He fell for me." Mr. Hadley gave him a look. "You don't think he did?" "He did. And I can't believe he had the guts to walk away from all that money." He handed the money back, Vic. "He felt guilty for what he did. He actually fell for you." Vic stood there, his mind racing. He had thought the whole thing was a game, that Dash had been using him for money just like everyone else, but Dash had really cared. "He's gone," Mr. Hadley continued, "but I'm not going to force him to come back. I don't have that kind of power over him anymore." Vic shook his head, not sure how to feel. He turned toward the door, and just as he was about to step out, Mr. Hadley spoke again, softer this time. "Vic," he called. Vic paused but didn't turn around. He was angry at his dad for everything. "What?" he said lowly. "I think you should go after him," Mr. Hadley said, almost reluctantly. "I know this whole thing was a mess and my fault, and I'm sorry for everything, but if you don't go after him, you might lose something you didn't even realize you wanted." Vic swallowed hard, and without another word, he left the office. Vic spent the next hour pacing around his apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had been wrong about Dash. His mind kept replaying Dash's crying face as he begged him to forgive him. He had pushed Dash away when he should have embraced him. Vic knew he had to act fast. With desperation, Vic found Dash's home address. Without even thinking about what might happen, he left to look for him. When he arrived, he hesitated for only a moment before knocking on the door. His nerves made his hand tremble as he stood there, waiting. The door finally opened, and Dash stood in the doorway, clearly shocked to see him. He was dressed in a hoodie and sweatpants, his hair messy, and his eyes red, as if he hadn't slept and had been crying for days. "Vic!" Dash's eyes widened as he looked at him. "What are you doing here?" Vic swallowed hard. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I was wrong, Dash. I've been an idiot." "Vic, you don't have to apologize. I was the one at fault." Vic shook his head. "I do have to. I don't want to lose you. I was stupid, but I care about you a lot, more than I thought I could." Dash could feel his heart beating as he processed what Vic said. "Vic, I didn't want to hurt you," Dash muttered, his voice cracking a little. "I never meant to." Before Dash could finish his sentence, Vic closed the remaining space between them. Without thinking, he pulled Dash into a kiss. Dash responded almost immediately, pulling him in deeper. The kiss was slow at first, but the desperation Vic had been holding back for so long became clear. He wrapped his arms around Dash, pulling him closer as if trying to make up for the time they had lost. Vic's hand slid down to Dash's waist, and a low moan escaped Dash when Vic deepened the kiss, his lips hungry and urgent, as if he couldn't get enough of Dash. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. As they broke the kiss for air, Dash's eyes widened. "We are still outside, Dash." he exclaimed, pulling Vic inside his house and locking the door. Vic just chuckled at Dash's flustered expression. Dash rolled his eyes, pulling Vic into a kiss again to shut him up. His hands roamed, finding their way under Vic's shirt. Vic gasped against Dash's lips, his own hands trembling as he pulled Dash's hoodie over his head, revealing his toned chest. "Vic, are you sure about this?" Vic cupped Dash's face. "I've never been more sure of anything." And that was all it took for Dash to lead the way to his bedroom. The next morning, Dash was in the kitchen making breakfast. He felt happy with everything that had happened with Vic. As he flipped the bacon, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know it was Vic. The soft thud of Vic's limping steps made Dash grin before he even saw him. Vic entered the kitchen, walking a little slower than usual. He was still limping, though it wasn't as bad as it had been the night before. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Dash said with a smirk, his back still turned as he moved the eggs to the side. Vic groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, you didn't have to make breakfast alone." Dash gave him a glance, his lips curling into a teasing smile. "Well, I figured you might need some energy this morning after last night's strenuous activities." Vic froze, eyes narrowing as he took a step forward. "Oh, so you're bringing that up now, huh?" Dash chuckled, turning to face him. "I mean, you did make a joke about limping on our business trip, and now look at you actually limping." Vic limped forward, lightly shoving Dash's chest. "Shut up, Dash. You're lucky I'm too sore to do more than that." Dash staggered back a little, laughing. "I deserved that." "I really did." He held his hands up in mock surrender. "So, I guess I was right after all," Dash said with a playful grin. "You did end up on the bottom last night, despite saying you were always on top." Vic frowned, but there was amusement in his eyes. "Just wait until I'm fully recovered. You'll be the one on the bottom then." Dash smirked, immediately vanished, causing Vic to point at him and laugh. "Oh my God, the look on your face." A few days later, Dash found himself back in the office, where things had started to fall back into place. "You're stuck with me as your assistant again," Dash said teasingly. "But I can't promise I won't get distracted now that we're together." Vic stood up, walking over to Dash. "I think we can handle it," Vic said. The way he said it made it seem like he was talking about something else. As Vic closed the distance between them, Dash's heart fluttered in his chest. They were no longer just a people caught in a business arrangement. They were together, for real this time. "Let's make this work," Dash said softly. Vic smiled, pulling Dash in for a quick, private kiss. "We already are." The end.